One of Michele Bullock's key responsibilities will be implementing the sweeping changes announced as part of the RBA review. There are 51 recommendations and the RBA have accepted them all in principle. Some things will need to be legislated by the Parliament, while others will be the responsibility of the Reserve Bank. I caught up with Danielle Wood, Chief Executive of the Grattan Institute, a little earlier.
Look, I think it's not a surprising appointment at all. She obviously brings a very deep knowledge of monetary policy given her very long career at the bank. So I think it probably signals from the government a want to have that sort of deep knowledge and continuity, but at the same time, I think she's shown a willingness to embrace organisational change, which is obviously really important in this next phase with the government trying to implement the changes from the RBA review.
Yeah, you mentioned she's a long-term employee, someone obviously very familiar with the culture at the RBA, which the Reserve Bank review actually said needed to be changed. So is she a little bit compromised here, being a long-term employee, now needing to really change the whole structure of the Reserve Bank over the next 12 months?
Look, I don't think that's necessarily the case, and certainly my understanding is that she's been very open through the RBA review process. Just because you're an insider doesn't mean that you can't affect cultural change. So I don't think that rules her out from being able to really effectively implement what are some very significant changes to the bank's decision-making processes and structures, but also internal culture.
Do you think Governor Lowe's position basically became untenable last year when the Treasurer announced that wide-ranging review into the Reserve Bank? Was the writing on the wall?
Not necessarily. I think obviously the review had some criticisms of how the bank had been operating, but overall it did find it was still a very effective institution. So look, it wasn't, I suspect it wasn't a clear-cut decision. I would certainly hope that it doesn't in any way reflect the fact that Phil Lowe as Governor had to make a series of very difficult decisions over the course of the last year, substantially increasing interest rates. That is a hard thing to do, but that was the right thing for the Governor to do.
Michele will start on the 18th of September. What sort of economy is she inheriting from Governor Lowe? Look, she's inheriting, frankly, an economy that's in quite a challenging position.
It may be in some ways a little easier for her because it looks like we are very close to the top of the tightening cycle. And if we look at Philip Lowe's language from last week, certainly question marks about whether further rate tightening will be required. If there is, suspect only one or two more. But the big question for her will, of course, be can we avoid a recession? As we've had to up rates further than any of us perhaps anticipated, the risk of that is growing. So that's going to be the choppy waters of fast slowing growth is going to be the world that she is dealing with.
Yeah, quarterly growth for GDP in the March quarter just 0.2%. Could we already be in negative quarter right now?
It's certainly possible, and if you look at the kind of trend of consumption and investment, things are heading downwards. So we won't know that figure for some time, but certainly the trend is down.
And then just put yourself in Michele's shoes for a minute. You're starting in September. How difficult is it going to be to get the Australian public on side early, especially if she might need to lift interest rates once or twice?
Look, the Reserve Bank Governor is a hard job, and I think she knows that. She's gone in with open eyes. She's going to have to make the call that's right for the Australian economy in the eyes of her and the board. I think she will have to, do what any Reserve Bank Governor does and explain that to the Australian public. Not an easy gig by any means.
I guess the advantage for her is she has been appointed by the Treasurer and the Prime Minister, so she's got their backing, and the government, I guess, will really want her to succeed in the role, surely.
Absolutely. It is an appointment. She has 5 years. As I said, we're probably close to the top of this tightening cycle. Into the new year, we may well be talking about reducing rates depending on how things go in terms of the broader economic outlook.
Well, just earlier this week, the outgoing Governor, Philip Lowe, committed to some pretty big changes within the central bank, reducing the number of board meetings per year down to 8 and then regular press conferences. These changes are surely going to be a good thing for the Reserve Bank.
Yeah, I certainly think they are a positive. They do reflect the recommendations of the RBA review. They bring us more in line with international standards. I think particularly reducing the number of meetings, I think is quite an important change. Getting off that kind of monthly treadmill and having a little bit more time and information when the board makes a decision, I think is a positive.
And yeah, there's also a range of items the RBA are considering introducing from the 1st of July next year, including maybe publishing the vote count at meetings and board members actually explaining their decisions publicly. These sound like some pretty significant changes to bringing the RBA in line with other central banks around the world.
Indeed they are, and again, that is coming out of the Reserve Bank review. The idea is that will be after the new Monetary Policy Committee is in place. That is going to have, that's going to be made up of people with deep expertise in macro policy or other areas of economic policy. And so the idea then that you've got a group of people very well placed perhaps to comment publicly, very well placed to have their votes put on the public record, I think is a strong one. And as you said, that it is consistent with a lot of international central banks as well.
Yeah, how important do you think it is hearing from members of the Monetary Policy Board, them actually getting out there and doing speeches, doing potential press conferences?
Well, I mean, the risk is obviously that if they're not on message, you end up with kind of 10 different voices saying different things, which is not a good thing in the monetary policy arena. But the benefit is you will get the sort of hear different ways perhaps of thinking or communicating. It sends the message that this is a decision made by a board, not by a single individual, which I think sometimes gets lost in the current debates around monetary policy.
One thing Governor Lowe has talked about quite a bit over the past 6 to 12 months has been the need to improve productivity in Australia. Do you see that as one of the big challenges facing the new Governor, Michele Bullock?
Productivity is a massive challenge, for everyone that's running economic institutions in this country. It's not, really the Reserve Bank that holds the levers around productivity. They're more concerned with smoothing the business cycle. But Phil Lowe is absolutely right to point out that if we want to see real wages growth and growth in living standards, productivity needs to move. And there are a whole lot of players in the economy that are going to need to be turning their attention to that.
So overall, new governor and big changes at the RBA from next year. Is this going to result in a better RBA and a better economy for Australians?
Look, I think when we look at the suite of changes that have been suggested by the review that are slowly being picked up by the bank, if the new governor, really puts her emphasis on making that all work, I think we will have a better interest rate decision-making process, and that gives us the best chance of having a strong set of macroeconomic outcomes.
Well, Danielle Wood, Chief Executive of the Grattan Institute, thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Ed.